Hello again. In our last conversation, we chatted about this idea of how a blacksmith could change the world, at least the world of the Bible. And we suggested that the same kind of secular vocation, the secular employee, or the master of their own craft in our world today, could have the same kind of impact. And so I want to circle back to an idea that we kind of mentioned in passing in the last conversation, and this idea was that all vocation is holy and sacred. What vocation is, at its core, what all vocation is, no matter what we're talking about, you can boil all vocation down to this one idea. It's the proper ordering and stewarding of God's creation. Vocation, labor, not necessarily toil, but the idea of labor is the idea of partnering with God to properly order and steward God's creation. Before what we call the fall, in the garden with Adam and Eve, God gave Adam and Eve a task. They were to properly order and steward. He was looking for partners. Before they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, before the story took a hard left turn, you had this life, this relationship, this experience with God in the garden where they were participants. They were partners with God in taking creation and all of its potential, because it had dynamic potential, creation did. And they were ordering and stewarding it to take creation somewhere, and God could not wait to see where it would go. A million different possible directions. Just don't do this one thing, but a million other things that could be done. Like that's where the story begins. That labor is something that's very, very much baked into creation. Like it's a part of who we are and who God is and the world that we live in. Toil is the thing that comes as a result of the fall. Toil is where you labor and you get resistance. Toil is where you engage in labor and it doesn't produce what it ought to produce. But labor itself, well, that's a part of the created order. It's a part of how the world is supposed to work in its perfect design. Labor is something very godly, divine, a part of who we are, the essence of who we are as human beings. And so in this original story, when it starts, what you have is you have everything in its proper place. God has designed a world that he's quite inspired by. He keeps calling it good. It's good. It's good. It's very good. And God has this world, and everything is in proper relationship. I don't like to call it perfect, because perfect is a Western idea. It's static. It's a Greek idea. It's the static, abstract concept, a little bit more Platonic. What God does, God never calls it perfect. What he calls it is good. It's pure, but it's dynamic. It's not static. It's dynamic. It's not abstract. It's very concrete, and it's loaded with potential. But everything in the beginning of the story is good. There's nothing missing. There's nothing lacking. And there's nothing out of place. Everything is in perfect order and wholeness. And the Hebrew word for this is shalom. You've probably heard of it before. Shalom, everything being in its proper place. Shalom, another way to talk about shalom is in terms of relationships. There's a relationship between God and creation. There's a relationship between God and humans. There's a relationship between humans and themselves. There's a relationship between humans and creation. There's a relationship between humans and themselves. Like, there's all these relationships in creation when it's first made, and all these relationships are right. All these relationships are straight and good and pure. Like, all these relationships are the Hebrew word of straight, like not crooked. But the Hebrew concept is everything is that this idea of shalom. And then, of course, we know how the story goes. You have the story of tragedy, the Adam and Eve story, the tree story, the taking the fruit story, and then the story that immediately follows. I have always found interesting in the pages that follow the story of what we call the fall. You don't have God immediately establishing a priesthood. Right? You would think, now that humanity is broken, now that there's a disrupted relationship, now that the relationships aren't shalom, now that they're not straight, but now that they're crooked, Like you would think that now you need clergy. Now you need like the spiritual men and women of the cloth, like people who are going to come along and straighten things out in a spiritual sense. But you don't get that in the pages that immediately follow the story of the fall. You don't get priesthood. That's not one of the next vocations you get. What you do actually get is the story of a shepherd and a farmer. We know them by Cain and Abel. In Genesis 4, this is a few opening verses, we read about them. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. Cain, she said, with the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. So in the very first verses, immediately following the garden story and that garden narrative, you have the description of the first two children we're told about. One is a farmer and one is a shepherd, and you get a story immediately of vocation. Now what is this vocation? Well, a farmer is somebody who has decided, they've learned that you can take the earth and you can take the soil, you can take seeds from plants and you can put them in rows and cultivate the soil. And if you add water and you add sunlight at all the right times and in all the right places, you can actually take. You can produce more seed. You can produce more fruit. You can produce more of creation, and then you can use that and take it and steward it and do something with it to bless other people. You can take creation somewhere. You can do something with creation. You can properly order and steward creation, and you can use it to produce more of creation. You can make it more effective. You can make it more efficient. This is vocation. On the other hand, his brother Abel, well, he's a shepherd. He's learned that you can take animals and you can put them together at different times of the year, and under the right conditions, they mate and they produce more offspring. And these animals, they produce things like wool for clothing or milk for food, and so you can properly order and steward this part of creation, these animals and this livestock, in such a way that you can actually produce. You can order and steward it. You can produce more of it. And you can use it to provide for, to care for others. You can make it more effective and make it more efficient. You can take creation somewhere. Both of these vocations are a beautiful part of what God wants to do in the world. Like before the Cain and Abel tragedy, this is what God has designed. This is what God has desired. What will Cain and Abel do with their vocation? And we discover even in this story, you can take vocation in a positive direction, or you can take vocation in a negative direction. You can let vocation be, you can steward it to let yourself be used by God to bless others, or you can take this vocation and kind of like steer it and try to use it for yourself. And this story tells us about this is vocation. Vocation. And vocation is deeply seated into the experience of humanity. Vocation goes all the way back to the beginning pages of creation. Vocation is the labor that we are called to. It is a part of what we engage in. It is in many ways the definition of how we are going to partner with God in the world that we live in. This is each one of us. Every one of us today has a vocation. We have something we're called to do. And something some of us that we feel called to do. Like some of us have found the things that we love to do. Some of us are stuck in a spot where we don't love it. We don't feel like it's our calling. Like some of us find ourselves as the barista behind the counter at Starbucks. Some of us find ourselves in this job over here that's not what we're designed to do. And yet all vocation, where we find ourselves every day when we get up and we have our 9 to 5, whatever those careers or those experiences look like, every single one of us engages in taking God's creation and properly ordering and stewarding it to make it more effective, to make it more efficient. And we can do this in such a way that blesses other people. And it pulls the world together. It restores those right relationships. Or we can do it in such a way that it tears it apart and just kind of takes it all for me and looks out for me. This is central to the life of God. This isn't a side conversation. This isn't like, oh yeah, that's kind of a good point over there. No, this This is the essence of who you are when you wake up every single day. This is the kind of stuff that you engage in. You spend over half of your life doing these things. Because this is what it means to live. This is what it means to be alive. This is what it means to engage in the work of God's creation. And God is trying to put this world that had shalom, this world where there were right relationships between God and humans, between humans and each other, between humans and creation, between humans and themselves. There were right relationships. Everything was whole, shalom. And then everything got distorted. Instead of harmony, there's dissonance. Everything got jerked out of place. Everything that was straight got made crooked. And God's in the business, and God's looking for partners who will help him straighten out that which has been crooked, to put back into place that which has been taken out of place, to restore and repair shalom. The Jews have a phrase for this. They call it tikkun olam. Tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. There's this great quote in Talmud. There's this quote that says, you are not obligated to complete the task of tikkun olam. You're not obligated to complete the task, but nor do you have the freedom to abandon it. Like, you are not obligated to complete it. You are also not free to abandon it. All of us engaged in this work of straightening, of putting things back. This work of putting things back in their proper place is the work of justice. We call that justice. And it shows up in lots of places in many different forms. And there's lots of different kinds of justice. But all of this, anything that is about the work of putting things back in their proper place, whether it's economic or social or relational or emotional or mental or medical or anything you're doing in vocation, that's putting the world back together. That's justice work. All vocation on some level is about justice work. It's all about justice. It's all about the work of putting things, restoring shalom. And this state of being in right relationship, this reality of shalom, there's another word for that in the Hebrew. It's called tzedakah, righteousness. Righteousness is the state of shalom, the state of right relationship. That's righteousness. We always think of rule following. That's not at all what the Hebrew means. The Hebrew means a state of right relationship. And then mishpat, that's the Hebrew word for justice. Justice is the work of getting to tzedakah. The work of getting to tzedakah, restoring tzedakah. And you can also say it in the inverse, by the way. In Jewish thought, justice is what follows righteousness. Justice is what follows. Justice is the byproduct of righteousness. But you also find righteousness by doing the work of justice. They're all interconnected. They're all in this beautiful, harmonious relationship. And it's exactly the thing that God always called his people to. Even from the very, this goes all the way back to your opening pages of the Bible. I'm still in the book of Genesis, but if I go to Genesis chapter 19, God says this about Abraham. Genesis 18 verse 19. God says, "For I have chosen him," in reference to Avraham. "I have chosen Avraham so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." Doing what is right and just. Some translations say by doing righteousness and justice. By pursuing righteousness and justice. This is what God's invited his people to be a part of. This is what God has invited you to be a part of. And this is what we could do a better job of equipping people for. As ministries, as nonprofits, as pastors, as leaders. We could do a better job equipping people with understanding not just how to get to heaven, not just how to experience some religious experience or have or understand how a person gets to heaven or what salvation looks like or to understand the intricacies of justification. All these things are beautiful. They're beautiful. Not just facilitating worship, but also helping people facilitate worship through the very work that they do every single day, that their whole lives, their whole vocation, whether they love it, whether they hate it, whether it's the thing that they're called to and their whole being resonates, or whether or not the work that they're called to do is a grind, but yet they find meaning and purpose because they understand it's connected to the work of righteousness and justice. We want to be telling the next generation about this. We want to be telling college students. We want to not to be telling them about it. We want to be training them in the intricate details. We want to be equipping them to know exactly what this looks like and how to engage it and how to be experts in it. We want the students that come through our campus ministry to be so in tune with this concept that they literally change the world. At Impact Campus Ministries, we have our why statement, our vision statement. It's our why statement. It's why we do campus ministry. You impact the you impact the world. We believe the world, there are things in the world that need to be changed, repaired, restored. And we believe that the way you impact the world, one of the ways you impact the world is to deal with those who are just entering it on a vocational level, to make their difference, to put their stamp, to have an impact. That's what we believe in. I want to talk to you more about that. I'm looking forward to a conversation that we're going to have coming up very soon, and I hope we just have a great time. But if you missed our first conversation, I'll put that the link to that in the description of this video, part 1, part 2, and then come find us for part 3. Whether you're on a Zoom call, whether you're able to join us in person, come find us, and we look forward to chatting more about this idea and just having a great conversation. Thanks, everybody.